Did you know that grassroots movements can change the world, often with just a handful of people? In the past decade, grassroots campaigns have led to monumental shifts in politics, culture, and society. For instance, the Women's March in 2017 brought together over 4 million people across the globe in just one day. That's the largest single-day protest in US history. But here's a shocking fact: less than 5% of Americans believe they can influence government decisions. This belief is far from the truth. Grassroots movements show us that everyday people can create real change, even against powerful opponents. In fact, studies reveal that over 60% of successful social movements start locally, often driven by passion and community support. In this video, we will explore how grassroots movements operate, the strategies they use, and why they matter now more than ever. From inspiring stories of activists who went from the streets to the Senate to the way social media transforms local actions into global movements, you'll discover the hidden power of grassroots initiatives. So, buckle up and get ready to see how ordinary people are shaking up the political landscape and demanding change. Chapter 1: The Silent Revolution: How Local Voices Shift National Agendas. You might not realize it, but some of the biggest political changes often start in the smallest places. Grassroots movements aren't flashy or well-funded, yet they can completely reshape national conversations. Take the civil rights movement in the US. It began with local leaders like Rosa Parks and small protests, but it ultimately rewrote national laws. It wasn't overnight, though. These movements are slow and deliberate, yet their impact is huge. A strategy grassroots movements often use is what experts call the snowball effect. It starts small, but with time and persistence, more people join in. The power of community is key here. When people see their neighbors, friends, or family members involved, they're more likely to join in too. Studies show that nearly 70% of people are more likely to take political action if someone they know personally asks them to get involved. That's a huge boost for grassroots efforts. One unique approach used by successful movements is something called moral persuasion. It's less about facts and figures, and more about appealing to people's values. This strategy taps into emotions, driving home how change will impact families, communities, or the future of children. Moral persuasion was a key tool in movements like the environmental protests that led to the 1970 creation of Earth Day, now a global event that began with just a few thousand people. The takeaway? Grassroots movements win because they connect with people at a personal level. They don't need huge budgets. They need real stories, passionate leaders, and the ability to inspire action from the bottom up. Chapter 2: People over Politicians: The Real Power Behind Policy Changes. When you think of who holds political power, you probably think of lawmakers and politicians. But here's the catch: real power often lies with the people who vote those politicians in or out. Grassroots movements have figured this out, and they know how to use it to their advantage. A great example of this strategy in action is the Tea Party movement in the US. It started in 2009 with a small group of people angry about government spending. At first, no one took them seriously. But within just 2 years, they had helped elect over 30 new members to Congress, reshaping national policy. The secret to their success? They targeted vulnerable incumbents and used local chapters to create personalized pressure. Instead of focusing on large-scale protests, they worked neighborhood by neighborhood, ensuring that their message got out to the right voters. Another effective grassroots strategy is direct action. This can be anything from sit-ins to strikes, and it's designed to disrupt the status quo. But here's the thing: it's not just about causing chaos. It's about showing people that they have the power to force change, even if they don't have political office. In 2020, more than 15 million Americans participated in Black Lives Matter protests, making it one of the largest movements in US history. The result? Many cities across the country re-evaluated their police policies, and federal conversations about police reform followed shortly after. What this shows is that politicians aren't always in control. The people are. And grassroots movements have mastered the art of applying just the right amount of pressure at the right time to make sure their voices are heard. When enough people get involved, it becomes impossible for the political establishment to ignore. Chapter 3: When social media activism becomes real-world power. We've all seen those viral hashtags, petitions, and social media campaigns. But here's the interesting part: these digital movements are far more powerful than they seem. Social media can amplify a grassroots movement's reach in ways that traditional strategies never could. Twitter, for example, is a favorite tool for activists, with studies showing that 74% of adults who use Twitter have engaged with political content. And what's really fascinating is how online campaigns can jump from the digital world to the real one. One prime example of this is the #MeToo movement. It started with just one tweet in 2006 but didn't take off until 2017. Within weeks, millions of people worldwide shared their personal stories of sexual harassment and assault. The hashtag gave survivors a platform, but it was the real-world consequences that shook Hollywood and beyond. People lost jobs, industries were forced to change policies, and governments passed new laws to address the issue. This is the real power of social media, turning awareness into action. But here's the trick that smart grassroots movements understand: they don't just post and hope for the best. They use targeted messaging to make sure their content reaches the right people. By using tools like geo-targeting and influencer partnerships, they can hone in on specific communities. Take the 2018 March for Our Lives movement. After the tragic Parkland shooting, young activists used social media to gather millions of supporters. Their secret weapon? They mobilized younger generations who normally wouldn't participate in politics and inspired them to demand gun control reforms. The key here is combining online energy with offline organization. Activists who understand this blend can rally digital followers and transform that momentum into physical protests, fundraising, and eventually, policy changes. Social media alone isn't enough, but paired with on-the-ground action, it becomes an unstoppable force for grassroots movements. If you're enjoying this content, don't forget to subscribe. We have more eye-opening insights coming your way. Chapter 4, From Streets to Senate, the journey of grassroots leaders. Not all grassroots activists stay on the streets. Some go from organizing protests to crafting laws themselves. The strategy here? Take the fight from outside the system and move it inside. That's where real change happens. One well-known example is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who was once a community organizer and bartender. In 2018, she shocked the political world by defeating a longtime Democratic incumbent to win a seat in Congress. Her campaign was powered by grassroots energy, knocking on doors and connecting with voters face-to-face, with 70% of her donations coming from small donors. The transition from activist to politician isn't easy. But the advantage grassroots leaders have is their deep connection with people. They understand the issues because they've lived them. When they get into office, they bring that experience with them. Author Saul Alinsky, in his book Rules for Radicals, emphasizes that real action is in the reaction of the opposition. This means grassroots leaders know how to anticipate political resistance and use it to their advantage once in power. The strategy these leaders use is what some call representational authenticity. Voters trust them because they feel like these candidates understand their struggles. Grassroots leaders rarely rely on corporate donations or political elites. Instead, they build campaigns on personal connections and small contributions. In fact, 60% of voters are more likely to support a candidate who is seen as an outsider, someone who isn't tied to big money or special interests. This approach helps grassroots leaders stay connected to their base even after they take office. Once inside, grassroots politicians often act as disruptors. They push policies that might seem radical at first but eventually become mainstream. Look at Bernie Sanders, who was once considered an outsider with his calls for Medicare for all. Now, it's a major part of the Democratic platform. This shows how grassroots leaders don't just follow trends, they create them. Chapter 5, The Underdog Effect, Why Grassroots Movements Succeed Where Elites Fail. Here's something surprising: grassroots movements succeed more often than traditional, elite-driven campaigns, even when they have fewer resources. Why? It's all about passion and authenticity. People respond to genuine emotion and shared experiences. When a movement taps into that, it becomes powerful. One study shows that movements driven by personal stories are 33% more likely to create change compared to those based purely on facts or statistics. One strategy grassroots movements use to overcome big money opposition is tactical adaptability. They don't have rigid plans. Instead, they change their tactics based on what's happening on the ground. The Occupy Wall Street movement is a great example. It began with just a few dozen people in 2011, but within weeks, it spread to cities all over the world. While it didn't have a clear leader or agenda, its ability to adapt to local contexts kept it alive and relevant for much longer than expected. The underdog advantage is about turning weaknesses into strengths. Grassroots campaigns might lack money, but they have people. They might lack media coverage, but they have social networks. This connects back to a key idea from Gene Sharp's book, The Politics of Nonviolent Action, which argues that political power depends on the consent of the governed. If grassroots movements can withdraw that consent, even the most powerful elites can be challenged. Sharp's research highlights how even small actions, like boycotts or strikes, can weaken institutions and force them to listen. Another reason grassroots movements succeed is they don't just follow the rules. They rewrite them. Black Lives Matter, for instance, didn't just ask for change through the typical political channels. Instead, they organized massive protests, blocked highways, and forced uncomfortable conversations. This direct, disruptive action made it impossible for lawmakers to ignore their demands, leading to real reforms in policing across many cities. If you found this video enlightening, subscribe for more insights on the power of grassroots movements and how they shape our world.